The bloody clash of armored vehicles at the Battle of Kursk. War tales. The summer of 1943 marked the turning point of the Second World War on the Eastern Front. Germany, still recovering from the shattering defeat at Stalingrad, prepared for a bold counterstroke. Their goal was to crush the Soviet armies in a massive pincer movement around the Kursk salient, a bulge in the Soviet front lines. But what awaited them was no mere defensive line, it was the greatest armored confrontation in history. The gathering storm. The Kursk salient jutted like a fist into German-occupied territory. For Adolf Hitler, it was both an opportunity and a danger. If he could slice through the bulge, the Red Army would be crippled, and perhaps the tide of war might turn back in Germany's favor. The operation, codenamed Citadel, involved nearly 900,000 men, 3,000 tanks, and 2,000 aircraft. On the other side, Soviet intelligence had long anticipated the strike. Thanks to intercepted communications and spies in Berlin, Joseph Stalin's high command knew nearly every detail of the coming attack. Marshal Zhukov and General Rokossovsky transformed the Kursk front into a fortress of fire. Defensive belts ran for hundreds of kilometers, minefields, anti-tank ditches, hidden artillery, and strongpoints bristling with guns. Behind them, Soviet armored reserves waited like coiled steel serpents. In July 1943, the steppe trembled under the weight of war machines. The battle begins. At dawn on July 5, 1943, the thunder began. German Tiger tanks, behemoths of armor with 88mm cannons, rolled forward, leading wedge-shaped assaults against Soviet lines. Panzer IVs and Ferdinand tank destroyers followed, their engines roaring like beasts unleashed. Luftwaffe planes screeched overhead, bombing Soviet trenches and artillery. But the Red Army was ready. Waves of artillery unleashed a curtain of fire, ripping into advancing German units. The ground shook, earth erupted, and the first minefields exploded beneath the steel monsters. Soviet T-34s, smaller and faster than their German rivals, darted through the smoke, harassing flanks before vanishing behind ridges. The battlefield became a nightmare of fire and iron. Tank crews fought blind, dust and smoke choking vision. Metal clashed with metal, shells punched holes through armor, and men screamed inside burning coffins of steel. Kursk was not a battle of maneuver, it was a grinding, bloody collision. The clash of steel. By July 10th, the Germans pushed deeper into Soviet defenses, especially in the south near the village of Prokhorovka. Here, the 2 SS Panzer Corps, elite and ruthless, drove against the 5th Guards Tank Army under General Rotmistrov. On July 12, 1943, Prokhorovka became the crucible of the Eastern Front. The morning sun rose red through smoke. Over 800 Soviet tanks surged forward to meet roughly 300 German armored vehicles. It was the largest single tank engagement the world had ever seen. Engines roared like thunder. Tracks chewed the earth into mud. The Soviet T-34s charged headlong, many without stopping to fire, determined to close the distance before German long-range cannons could rip them apart. German Tigers and Panthers stood their ground, their superior guns blasting holes in the advancing horde. Each shot from a Tiger destroyed a tank, yet for every Soviet tank that burned, 2 more pressed on. The fields erupted in chaos. Tanks rammed into one another, guns blazing at point-blank range. Flames engulfed wrecks, turning them into blackened tombs. The cries of the dying mingled with the grinding of steel. A Soviet tanker named Sergei Antonov later described the scene. "We charged through fire, through smoke so thick we could not see the sun. Our T-34 shook as shells slammed into the armor. Ahead of me, comrades' tanks exploded, but we had no time to grieve. We rammed into the enemy, point blank, firing until our barrels glowed red." 4 hours, the clash raged. German precision against Soviet ferocity. Tigers, though mighty, found themselves overwhelmed, swarmed from every angle. T-34s darted like wolves, circling prey too heavy to maneuver quickly. At times, tanks collided head-on, crews leaping from hatches as vehicles burst into flames. By nightfall, the fields near Prokhorovka were a graveyard of iron, smoldering hulks scattered across blackened earth, hundreds of wrecks testifying to the scale of slaughter. The turning tide. Though the Germans inflicted horrific losses, they themselves were bled white. Every Tiger or Panther destroyed was a heavy blow, impossible to replace quickly. Soviet factories, meanwhile, churned out T-34s in endless waves. Worse for the Germans, News arrived that the Allies had invaded Sicily. Hitler, fearing the collapse of his southern front in Europe, ordered the offensive at Kursk to halt. His gamble had failed. For the Red Army, battered but unbroken, the moment was decisive. They launched counteroffensives across the front. Soviet infantry surged forward, supported by fresh tanks and artillery, reclaiming ground mile by mile. German forces, exhausted and depleted, fell back under relentless pressure. Prokhorovka's legacy. The Battle of Kursk lasted until August 23, 1943, by which time the Soviet Union had not only repelled the German assault but also seized the initiative for the rest of the war. Never again would the Wehrmacht launch a major offensive in the east. From Kursk onward, the Red Army would advance inexorably toward Berlin. The climax at Prokhorovka remained the defining moment of the clash. Soviet losses were staggering, hundreds of tanks destroyed in a single day. Yet, by sheer weight of men, machines, and determination, they halted Germany's finest armored corps. The once feared Tigers and Panthers were humbled, not by superior technology, but by relentless courage and industrial might. On that smoking battlefield, the myth of German invincibility was shattered. Kursk proved that the tide had turned, that the Soviet Union now held the strength to push the enemy back. The clash of armored vehicles at Prokhorovka was bloody beyond measure, but it forged the road to victory. Decades later, veterans on both sides would recall Kursk with awe and horror. Survivors spoke not of triumph, but of survival. They remembered the fields littered with twisted steel, the smell of burning fuel and flesh, the deafening roar of engines and explosions that seemed to shake the sky itself. For the Germans, Kursk marked the death knell of their eastern ambitions. For the Soviets, it was the beginning of a relentless march westward. The bloody clash of armored vehicles at Kursk was more than just a battle. It was the turning of the tide, a storm of steel that decided the fate of nations.